Chapter 1286, New Applications of Old Methods. A real opportunity. Pasha, Biles, and Phil were delighted to hear this. It was as if they had finally seen the light after searching for a long time in the dark night. What kind of opportunity? Roy blurted out from his dazed state. Pa pour. Klein wasn't in a rush. He smiled and said,
"Did you guys not notice? There is no clear indication on the notice of who the enforcer is."
As a keyboard warrior in the past, Klein had always claimed to be a jack-of-all-trades. Furthermore, he had interacted with many lawyers in his life and had an Earl of the Fallen marionette before. He had the basic foundation needed when it came to the law and rules. That's right, the announcement only mentioned a new consul, and it's not clear who the enforcer is. We encountered an invisible justiciar previously. Pasha and the others revealed a thoughtful expression. Upon seeing this, Klein reached out his hand and stroked the surface of the magic mirror as though he was combing an animal.
Under normal circumstances, everyone has tacitly acknowledged that the police and the authorities responsible for dealing with supernatural cases enforce the law. This is confirmed through a series of legal documents or the corresponding public knowledge. But this time, the rules haven't reached such an airtight level. If we say that the rules are built on a blank slate composed of the original laws, directives, and rules, then we should have seen the police, the Nighthawks, or the mandated punishers when we committed crimes. But that's not the case. In other words, the corresponding enforcer is indeed vague.
Pasha, who was the most knowledgeable among the Four Beyonders, thought for a moment before saying, "Perhaps the law enforcer is an abstract concept, or perhaps it is tacitly equivalent to the new consul."
The latter isn't clear either. It doesn't make it clear who the new consul is. This way, it can be anyone. The former isn't obliged to make it known.
Klein simply replied. Phil frowned and said, "We can't enforce the law like the citizens."
The corresponding authority is determined by eliminating groups via labels. Foreigners are targets of ostracization and pursuit, so they obviously lack the required law enforcement rights. As for the citizens, they only have it when dealing with foreigners. This is confirmed through the notice.
Klein explained with a smile. Without waiting for Roy and Biles to speak, Klein continued.
So I just used the contradiction hidden in this matter to get Roy to test it. The result is exactly as I predicted. First of all, the magic mirror isn't a foreign living being, neither is it a local. It's just an item with a certain level of intelligence. It cannot be placed into any particular group. This way, in a situation where the law enforcer isn't clear, those who aren't part of the elimination process have the right to enforce the law. Secondly, it had punished a foreigner. Those notices imply that all who deal with foreigners are law enforcers. Finally, the magic mirror itself has the rules of punishment. Before this rule is announced to be illegal, it has the right to punish others. Based on the 3 points above, I believe that 002 should be in a lot of conflict right now. Next, it will definitely issue a new law to clearly determine the main body of law enforcement, to mend the loopholes in this area. Once the main body of the law enforcement is revealed, it will contain a lot of information. It will help us lock on to the target. If 002 uses a method of adding prohibitions, it will definitely restrict itself, as it shares the same attributes as the mirror. This is definitely not its first choice.
At that moment, Roy, Pasha, and the others, who were listening to Klein's recount, suddenly had the feeling that he was a knowledgeable and highly intelligent person. Could it be that Mr. Magician is a wise man who likes to travel among the commoners and legends? The Four Beyonders each made similar but different guesses. At this moment, the magic mirror in Klein's hand emitted a misty aqueous light. Amidst the aqueous light, the silver mirror's surface showed the notice board. 2 more lines appeared on the bottom of the original piece of paper. All law enforcement must be carried out by the Trunsoist Brass Book or the group it authorizes. Any private rules can't surpass the official decree.
Trunsoist Brass Book. This is the full name of 002. The opportunity is here.
Klein's expression turned serious as he entered cogitation. He had forced 002 to clarify the main law enforcement to obtain more information so as to further understand the situation of the terrifying sealed artifact. And based on Klein's deduction, 002 was more or less related to a particular Sapphira, just like how he was back when he had yet to become the owner of Sapphira Castle. Therefore, furthering his understanding of it would inevitably result in reverse corruption, thereby establishing a certain connection. To a certain extent, the Sapphira was equivalent to a great old one, outer deity, or the cosmos. Back then, Klein had used such mysticism knowledge to lock onto the location of dark demonic wolf Kotar. Now, he was using it in the opposite direction. From his point of view, 002 was definitely more corrupted by a Sapphira than him. After all, sealed artifacts were in a state of having lost control. This was why they needed to be sealed. Under such circumstances, further understanding of 002 would result in corruption. The reality proved Klein's hypothesis. And it was also because of this danger that he didn't show the new content presented by Rhodes to the four Beyonders. In cogitation, Klein quickly sensed that he had an invisible connection with a certain spot. The indescribable corruption was surging over. Ding! At the same time he flicked out a gold coin, he used Sapphira Castle's aura to cut off the connection and isolate the corruption. Immediately after, a clear image appeared in his mind. Klein grabbed the gold coin with his left hand. After the glove suddenly turned transparent, he instantly vanished from the room and appeared in a hall filled with bookshelves. On the side of the hall, with floor-to-ceiling windows, there were many long rectangular tables. On one of them was a book bound by thin brass sheets.
I found you.
A smile appeared on Klein's face. Forsha. He made use of the brief connection to do a divination. Then, he relied on the attraction between Sephiroth to make the teleportation become abnormally precise. The law of convergence between Sephiroth would allow Klein to accidentally enter the library and discover the brass book. However, it might have happened 2 days later, 2 weeks later, or even 2 years later. It wouldn't happen in time to stop anything. Furthermore, this was under the prerequisite that 002 didn't do any corresponding interference or avoidance measures. The clothes on Klein's back suddenly cracked as blood-red strokes appeared. This was a punishment for trespassing into a public area. Whipping!
Thankfully, this crime is very light, and I won't be punished for this crime for the next 1 or 2 minutes. The rules will give the trespasser time to withdraw.
Klein immediately reached out and grabbed a few times in the void. He didn't really pull out the figure of the ascetic leader, Ariana. This was because, to a non-committal person, a historical projection was a form of fraud. He only used this method to send his location information to the servant of concealment. Due to the same reason, Klein dispersed the glove on his left hand. During this process, the brass book started flipping and displayed the rules. When one's rationality drops to 20% of its original value, there would be signs of losing control. Scholar of Yore has the ability to summon historical void projections. The success rate of summoning depends on the familiarity and friendliness of the target. The Trunsois brass book is the most precious item. No living being is permitted to touch it. Those in violation are to be sentenced to death. One is not allowed to change the condition of the Trunsois brass book in any way. Those in violation are to be sentenced to death. The rules made Klein's eyelids twitch. He felt his rationality constantly dropping. This caused the primordial one's mental brand in his body to become more active.
The first part of the rules is presented in grayish-black, as though it's in a state that can't be changed. This requires 002 to awaken further. If it awakens to the extent of changing the rules in front, it'll be very terrifying. It might even reduce the success rate of my summonings, causing Beyonders to show signs of losing control if their rationality falls a little. With this we fix the problem of this variant of a seer being too strong. As expected of 002, it fully lives up to its serial number. The text behind is presented in silver. Does this mean that the rules can be altered or enhanced? I can't touch it. I can't change its state. That also means that I can't take it away, nor can I directly conceal the sealed artifact. Perhaps I can use the staff of the stars, or the box of the great old ones, to directly move this library into the cosmos and let 002 face those outer deities. But if the outer deities were to grasp this sealed artifact, the problem might be greater than it is now.
Klein hesitated for a moment and didn't risk summoning his Grade 0 sealed artifact. The next second, he heard a smacking sound. The figure of Ariana's simple linen robe and tree bark belt was quickly outlined at his side. She was lashed by an invisible whip, leaving behind an obvious bloody mark.
The first problem has been resolved. Now we need to consider the second problem, that is how to seal this fellow,
Klein said as he made haste. It wouldn't be long before he would suffer a second punishment. Ariana shook her head.
The corresponding information has been destroyed. We can only resolve it through trial and error.
That's a little dangerous. We don't know, but someone definitely knows.
Klein's heart stirred as he made his spirit body leave his body and enter the spirit world. Through the invisible barrier created by 002, he said to the Church of the God of Combat's chief shepherd, Larian, who was waiting for the curtain to disappear,
Perhaps we can make a deal.
"You want the method to seal 002? Do you think I'll agree?" Larian turned around and chuckled.
Actually, I'm very puzzled. Why must you sacrifice yourself for the fallen god of combat? By joining the Church of Evernight, you can still be an angel. And you can also receive blessings. You can also live for a very long time.
Klein didn't directly respond as he said. Larian's expression darkened as he said, "A mythical creature without any pious faith wouldn't be able to understand me."
As an evil god, isn't it normal for me to not be devout?
Klein couldn't help but mutter inwardly, was his humanity. Chapter 1287, Guidance. Seeing that Klein was momentarily at a loss for words, the chief shepherd of the Church of the God of Combat, Larian, revealed a solemn expression. Furthermore, the fall of a deity is only temporary. He will eventually return and awaken using my body. Ignoring the sequence 0 true deities, even kings of angels and a number of angels would often not completely die.
You should know very well that the apocalypse will come in another 10 or so years. I believe that the speed of the God of Combat's resurrection won't be fast enough.
Klein attempted to awaken him with the cruel reality. Larian snorted. You will never be able to imagine the power of God. He didn't give Klein the chance to continue his persuasion and revealed a smile. In short, I won't make a deal with you. Pray to Evernight. Pray to the deity you believe in to seal 002 and save you. But all I need to do is wait another 30 to 40 seconds before I can leave this place. Klein looked up at the curtain hanging from infinitely high above and didn't say anything else. He made his spirit body return to the library where the Trunsoist brass book was.
Do you have any ideas?
He asked without any delay. Ariana shook her head slightly and asked,
What did Larian say?
He told us to pray to the deities to seal 002.
As Klein spoke, he was suddenly stunned. What Larian said didn't seem to be problematic, but he had inadvertently revealed a very important piece of information. He believed that deities could seal 002 no matter who they were. Then, what does a deity rely on to seal it? By forcefully suppressing it with their sequence 0 status, or use a might that can destroy the world? Many questions appeared in Klein's mind. At this moment, Trunsoist brass book flipped to a blank page, producing silver words one after another. The language it used was the one on the first blasphemy slate. It seemed to be the source of all the languages that were still in use. In the blink of an eye, the silver words formed into new text. The Beltane City Library is the place where the Trunsoist brass book is kept. It is a place that must be heavily protected. Living beings who intrude without the Trunsoist brass book's permission will be severely punished.
It's an elevation of the punishment. I might be sentenced to death next.
Klein's pupils dilated as he quickly deduced the most likely development. However, he didn't panic at all. Instead, he smiled and said with sincerity,
My wish is to shrink the size of the Beltane City Library so that the spot where Ma'am Ariana and I are is the boundary line.
As soon as he finished speaking, he snapped his fingers and granted his own wish. As the snapping sound reverberated, the lawn that corresponded to the Beltane City Library disappeared. The building shrunk and the walls retreated. Soon, only a tenth of its original size was left. Klein and Ariana subconsciously arrived outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. Through the open window, they stared at the Trunsoist brass book that remained on the rectangular table. There was no change in the distance between them and the target. They were still very close, but they were no longer within the confines of being severely punished. However, due to their first violation of the curfew, they were once again whipped by an invisible law enforcer. After accumulating the wishes of restoring buildings one after another, Klein could create quite a miracle in this aspect. He didn't make another wish and continued thinking. He analyzed the hidden meaning behind the words of the chief shepherd of the Church of the God of Combat.
No, it shouldn't have been forcefully suppressed using a deity's status and level. Otherwise, my spiritual intuition would have told me the answer long ago. That would have made me activate Sapphira Castle's aura and complete the seal.
From a mysticism point of view, this is understandable. This is because 002 is clearly related to a particular Sapphira. It's difficult to suppress it by relying on the status and level of a sequence 0. By relying on the might of the deities themselves? This might be possible, but there's a high chance that it's not the real method. This is because Larion knows of a sealing method that can be completed without relying on the deities. What's special about a sequence 0 deity? And what methods can an angel use to achieve such a special sealing method?
The most special thing that I can think of at the moment is that a sequence 0 deity contains a uniqueness. This is something I can't summon from the historical void. It really has the characteristic of being unique. But how can an angel indirectly simulate a uniqueness?
Countless thoughts collided in Klein's mind, producing large amounts of sparks, but he still couldn't figure out the key to the problem. At this moment, the mercury-colored words on the Trunsoist brass book continued to seep out, forming new paragraphs that stipulated that Klein and Ariana were a group of people that needed punishment. Ariana observed silently for a while before suddenly saying,
I'll try to conceal the soil beneath the table to make 002 fall to the core. Raise your level of alertness to prevent any accidents.
Conceal the soil. Fall to the core. Klein's heart stirred. He felt that this was a rather good solution. The Trunsoist brass book had only forbidden the touching and changing its condition at present. The environment wasn't equivalent to its condition. In addition, they were only forbidden from entering Beltane City Library. It didn't mean that Klein and Ariana couldn't exert certain influences on it. And when 002, which hadn't been banned from leaving, passed through the concealed soil and fell to the core, it would lose its influence on Beltane City due to the distance, causing the laws it had set up to fail. That was the case, unless it was awakened further or came to life, allowing a larger region to fall under its jurisdiction. This way, Klein and Ariana no longer needed to be restricted by the rules. They could seek help from the Evernight goddess. However, when Ariana finally thought of a solution and was preparing to carry out the plan, a new law was completely formed. The Beltane City Library, the place where the Trunsoist brass book is stored. It is a place that must be strictly protected. No living thing or object is to deal any form of damage to it in any way.
Indeed, 002 has also noticed this loophole.
As Klein frowned slightly, he suddenly had an idea of what he had been thinking about. The uniqueness of a sequence 0 deity was indeed unique, but their sealing of 002 wasn't directly done by using the authority and power that came from it. It was very likely that they could rely on this trait of a uniqueness to lure 002 into setting up a series of contradictory rules, causing the sealed artifact to fall into a paradoxical cycle. In this aspect, angels, saints, and even ordinary people could accomplish that by themselves. The key was to think of paradox and guide it into establishing it. As for how to seal 002 after it entered a paradoxical cycle and was preparing to fix the loophole, Klein didn't have any clues at the moment, so he needed to make further observations.
How should I create a paradox?
All the rules and regulations set up by 002 quickly flashed through Klein's mind. In just a few seconds, he acutely grasped a point where he could create a paradoxical cycle. He quickly turned his head and said to Ariana,
Ma'am, let's not destroy the city library. We will directly conceal the other parts of the Beltane, indirectly causing it to lose the necessary support. This place will then collapse on its own, thus falling into the core.
Ariana didn't immediately do as he said. Instead, she turned her head and gave Klein a deep look.
This will cause the deaths of many civilians.
We have to make a choice between the lesser of two evils.
Klein said seriously. Ariana didn't respond and fell silent. It was as though she was in an intense mental struggle or making the appropriate preparations. At this moment, the two brass pages that had just written the two articles quickly created more new rules. Beltane is the city where the Trunsoist brass book is located, a true Holy Land in all senses of the phrase. No living thing or object is to deal any form of damage to it in any way. Shia, upon seeing this text, Klein wasn't disappointed. Instead, he smiled. With a snap, he snapped his fingers, causing scarlet flames to surge out of his pocket and quickly drown him. In just 2 to 3 seconds, a stream of flames descended from the sky. Klein jumped out and carried a person. That was one of the 4 Beyonders he had saved previously. He was the Beltane local, Biles, Klein said calmly as he pointed at the 002 on the rectangular table.
Go in and quickly flip through the brass book.
Biles didn't know exactly what had happened, but he believed that this magical magician, who had fulfilled 2 of his wishes, had found a way out of the situation plaguing Beltane. Thus, after taking a deep breath, he entered the city library through the miniaturized, open floor-to-ceiling windows. During this process, he didn't receive any severe punishments. In fact, he wasn't even whipped. Upon seeing this scene, Klein's smile widened. 002 had produced a paradox. Due to Aradis's existence, the Trunsoist brass book could only do a most comprehensive prohibition, preventing any living being or object from dealing any form of damage to it in any way. As a city, Beltane's definition didn't just include its terrain and buildings, it definitely included the residents here. This way, if 002 punished a Beltane citizen like Biles, any damage to him would go against the law it had just issued. If it didn't punish him, it would go against the laws that prohibited him from entering the city library. Hence, the Trunsoist brass book had entered a vicious cycle. Of course, Klein believed that such a paradox would quickly be corrected by appending additional clauses. He only hoped that Biles would be able to flip through the brass book and find clues to sealing it. Klein instructed as he stared at Biles and 002.
Pay attention to the currently open page. Once an article is about to take shape, immediately come out.
Chapter 1288, Key Intelligence. Although Biles had witnessed Phil's severed hand, Weber's hanging, and Mr. Magician's palm fused from worms, and also had a certain understanding of the horrifying anomaly brought about by 002, his lacking level and experience made him unaware of the true horror behind this matter. He mostly explained it away as a horror tale coming to life. Therefore, despite feeling afraid, he mustered up his courage and quickly approached the rectangular table under the watch of the magical magician and grounded angel. Of course, him being from the sailor pathway was partly responsible. Within 2 or 3 steps, Biles had reached a spot where he could touch the brass book. Without thinking, he reached out his right palm and grabbed the brass pages on 002 and quickly flipped them. During this process, the back of Biles's hand held up the brass page which hadn't completely been filled to prevent it from being blocked, so as to allow him, Mr. Magician, and Ma'am Angel to observe the changes on it and react in advance. Amidst the flipping sounds, this sailor saw the line that touching the Trunsoist brass book would result in the death sentence. He was first alarmed before he was filled with a strong sense of puzzlement about his current state. However, this didn't affect his action of flipping the pages forward. Klein's eyes reflected the different brass pages, and each page had different rules. The projections of these brass pages didn't appear by making lines disappear and having new ones substitute them. Instead, they appeared side by side and gradually increased in number. In the end, Klein's eyes reflected a different number of brass pages in them. They were neatly arranged, one line after another. It was as though he had split the 002 into a single page and placed it on a glass platform to bask in the sun. This was a dream divination technique at the angel level, allowing Klein to reproduce the scenes he had just seen before his very eyes. With the passage of time, the brass pages in his dark brown eyes began to spin and pinpoint one of them. The Trunsoist brass book originates from a justiciar uniqueness that had been corrupted by the nation of disorder.
It's exactly as I expected. Since the Trunsoist brass book can produce all the low-level rules, the corresponding content must contain a description of itself. This is determined by its essence, unless it completely awakens or comes alive and has the sufficient intelligence to know how to selectively hide it.
Just as a thought of joy flashed through Klein's mind, he saw a new word in mercury color appear on the unfilled brass page. This meant that 002 had finally diverted a portion of its power from its vicious cycle. It was preparing to add text as a supplementary explanation to fix the flaws. Without any hesitation, Klein shouted,
"Leave!"
Biles strictly obeyed the orders of a high-leveled figure, immediately withdrawing his right hand, turning around, and sprinting out the window. Seeing that the sailor with dual attributes had left the city library, Klein suddenly added,
"Make a move to attack me."
Biles's heart was filled with puzzlement, but he still raised his right arm and pulled back his shoulder. He put on a stance that looked like he was about to throw a punch at Klein. At this moment, a new article finally took shape. With regards to the rules above, the Trunsoist brass book and the group of people it permits have immunity while enforcing the law. However, even if this article was successfully published, Biles wouldn't suffer any punishment. Clearly, the Trunsoist brass book wouldn't pursue problems that led to a vicious cycle or unclear definitions. It was just like how it didn't pile crimes on our roads after it mended the loopholes in the rules. By the same logic, Biles, who had truly come into contact with 002, didn't suffer any contamination from a Sapphira. Before the supplementary clauses were published, Biles was a part of the Beltane. He couldn't be damaged in any sense, so he couldn't be corrupted. But with the additional clause, he wouldn't be retroactively punished for his previous actions. In fact, after Biles left the city library, he had violated the curfew order as well, but Klein had already noticed a problem. It was that when the Beltane citizens pursued foreigners while outside, they weren't restricted by the curfew. Therefore, he made Biles attack him in a manner to avoid the corresponding punishment. Right on the heels of that, he seized the opportunity, while 002 was fixing the loophole, to quickly recall the detailed information regarding the Trunsoist brass book. This book possesses a living characteristic, but most of the time, it's at a very low level. The first half of the book displays almost all the underlying rules, while the second half is blank. It needs to be filled in autonomously. Once there are no restrictions, it will naturally set up laws with certain biases for the surrounding areas and strictly enforce it. During this process, it will change and correct the rules based on the feedback. As the law gradually becomes stricter, his living characteristic will deepen. Once a law that can interfere with all aspects takes form, the Trunsoist brass book will completely come alive. It will possess true intelligence and has the ability to modify the first half of the underlying rules to a certain extent. The exact extent that it can reach is as follows. If there are contradictions in the laws that can't be corrected, or if the pages are all filled without being able to form a sufficiently airtight system of rules, the Trunsoist brass book will produce a new line at the boundary between the first and second half. All the following rules are ineffective. After this line takes form, the rules in the second half will disappear, and the pages will return to a blank slate. After the second half is completely blank, the clause, "All the following rules are ineffective," will be erased, and the Trunsoist brass book will repeat its previous actions until there is a set of laws that covers all aspects. The rules that it creates have to be publicized or informed to the masses before having them take effect. When there's no clear rule for a particular action, whether it's against the common knowledge of the surrounding living beings, Trunsoist brass book hates distorted and ugly rules. It hates having loopholes found.
What a detailed description. There should be a method to seal 002 in all of this.
Klein's thoughts raced as he attempted to find information that he could use from every line of text. At this moment, the leader of the ascetics, Ariana, whispered,
Think of a way to fill the pages behind 002 without making it airtight enough.
That's right. In that case, the Trunsoist brass book will declare that all the following rules are ineffective. It'll redo it again. When that happens, its restrictions on the surroundings will temporarily vanish, allowing us to have the chance to touch it, take it away, or directly pray to a deity. But how should we go about doing this? The Trunsoist brass book hates distorted and ugly rules. It hates having loopholes found.
Klein's heart stirred as he had an idea. Without any hesitation, he stretched out his arms as if he was hugging the air. In the next second, inside the building, whose dimensions had shrunk to 1/10 of the original Beltane City Library, a hall that was covered with deep black stone slabs with all kinds of scuffing descended into the real world. There were 8 black stone pillars erected in the hall, and metal poles hung from the high dome. At the bottom were candlesticks carved into different creatures, 41 on the left and 40 on the right. This was the Tudor Trunsoist United Empire's Hall of Consuls that Klein had seen before. At that time, both consuls were still Sequence 1 Princes of Abolition of the Black Emperor pathway, so this place was filled with distortions. It didn't match the normal circumstances and didn't have any rules of aesthetics. Apart from that, when Klein summoned this historical scene, he also used his domain's ability to add the details of the 4th epoch which he knew. It made the order that stemmed from the Black Emperor become more and more detailed, as though it was corporeal. Pah! His wrists were severed as they landed on the ground. Blood spurted out from the wound just like an ordinary person. This was the second time Klein had committed fraud. The 2 palms and fresh blood that gushed to the ground quickly separated into transparent maggots and sticky, nearly shapeless liquid. As the worms of spirit convulsed and died, Klein grimaced due to the pain, as he made numerous worms crawl out from the stump to form new palms. At the same time, he tried his best to maintain the scene he had created through multiple summonings, not letting it dissipate. On the rectangular table, inside the book that had bound brass pages, many new lines of text appeared. All buildings and structures have to follow the golden ratio and principles of symmetry. Strange clothes are not permitted. The following crimes have the death penalty. The Trunsoist brass book flipped through the pages quickly as it targeted the laws that stemmed from a Black Emperor. The further it went, the faster the new text appeared. There were no more pauses that lasted nearly a minute. Inside the hall, the candlesticks that fell from the ceiling broke and disappeared. Then, the other parts of the hall experienced various changes, wiping away the original details of the order one by one. Finally, the hall could no longer be maintained. It collapsed and returned to the historical void. At that moment, the Trunsoist brass book had already flipped to the last 2 pages. It was spread out there without any movement, with the last page filled with text and no longer able to form a tight system of rules with what 002 had previously set. Klein silently exhaled and relaxed a little. He felt that his spirituality was almost depleted. Chia Mura. He turned his head and said to Ariana, Hi chia ache sesasala, ji amula.
Let's wait for an hour at Biles's house.
If they stayed where they were, they would suffer increasingly severe punishments from breaking the curfew until they were sentenced to death. As for monitoring the Trunsoist brass book, this mission that couldn't allow for mistakes was naturally handed over to a Rhodes. Although this magic mirror couldn't directly look at 002, it could pay attention to the notice board and determine the disappearance progress of the laws on it, Chapter 1289, Fooling. After returning to Biles's house, Klein pulled a chair over and sat down without waiting for Roy and company to make inquiries. He made a rather pious wish.
I wish for my spirituality to be restored.
With that said, he raised his right hand, snapped his fingers, and granted his own wish, thus allowing his spirituality to return to its normal state. Right on the heels of that, he extended his left palm, preparing to end the maintenance of the historical projection of the curtain before summoning a new one, so as to continue sealing off the spirit world area corresponding to Beltane City. This prevented the Church of the God of Combat's chief shepherd, Larion, from escaping.
There's no need to do so. There's always a next time.
At that moment, Ariana slowly shook her head, indicating that Klein no longer needed to summon the curtain that originated from the dark demonic wolf. There was a limit to the power of wishes. A miracle invoker couldn't satisfy the same wish in a short period of time, which meant that, within the next 1 or 2 hours, Klein couldn't recover his spirituality by granting his own wishes. Of course, to a qualified seer pathway angel, this limitation was something that could be avoided. For example, he could get Pasha, Roy, Biles, and Ariana to take turns to wish for Klein to regain his spirituality before granting their wishes as a miracle invoker. However, the problem was that even if he could recover his spirituality that many times, he wouldn't be able to maintain the curtain, which was at the level of a sequence 1 for more than an hour. Furthermore, he needed to wait an hour before 002 erased all the previous rules and rewrote them. After some deliberation, Klein nodded slightly and replied with a smile.
Let's give it a try first. After all, we're rather free right now. I'll give up after my last spirituality recovery attempt. Yes, this will purely depend on the chief shepherd's luck. Perhaps he might lose control because of anxiety, frustration, and nervousness.
As he spoke, Klein dispelled the maintenance of the original curtain, and his left hand moved forward immediately after that. He pulled out a new curtain, allowing it to appear inside the spirit world that corresponded to Beltane City. In an area where saturated colors overlapped one another, Larion, who was wearing a black robe with white edges and a square hat, felt the restriction disappear. Just as he was about to make his way out, he saw a new curtain descend, sealing him off again. The smile on his face instantly froze. Phew. A few seconds later, Larion slowly exhaled and composed himself mentally as he continued to wait. In the next hour, the chief shepherd of the Church of the God of Combat repeatedly experienced the despair and pain of having his hopes extinguished. He attempted to find the pattern and attempt to figure out the time interval so as to grasp the fleeting opportunity. He wanted to rush out of the barrier the moment the old curtain disappeared and before the new curtain was produced. However, he eventually discovered that the intervals didn't follow any pattern. The person stopping him didn't restore the barrier only when his spirituality was about to be depleted. At times, the other party would recreate the barrier far ahead of time. If it wasn't for the fact that Phasacian citizens weren't forced to change faiths from the God of Combat, and that the decree that Larion was considered a traitor hadn't been widely spread, this grounded angel might have already lost control on the spot. As time passed, Larion once again sensed the collapse of the old curtain. However, this time, there was no new curtain. He has finally reached his limit. Larion was delighted. Without any hesitation, he rushed out of the collapsing nascent divine kingdom. In the next moment, he saw a woman holding 4 blonde, red-eyed heads, dressed in a complicated long dress. An unknown existence that was wrapped in bandages with yellowish-brown liquid covering the entire, and several strange but abnormally powerful spirit world creatures. The curtain that Klein had summoned the previous times were historical void projections that had been tainted with Sapphira Castle's aura. It naturally attracted objects sensitive to it. He wouldn't even be surprised if Eamon was among the group. The smile on Larion's face froze again. Beltane City, in Biles's rental apartment. Klein suddenly raised his head and looked up into the sky. He muttered softly.
Impressive.
Following that, he became silent again until the magic mirror emitted an aqueous light that reflected the notice board's current state. The rules on the paper disappeared in reverse order of their appearance. This meant that 002 was beginning to erase the rules that it had set up and was preparing to redo everything. Once the curfew order was abolished, the highly focused Klein immediately pulled Ma'am Ariana and used Flaming Jump to appear outside the shrunken Beltane City Library. As he looked over, he realized that, on the brass pages of 002, the speed at which the rules were being wiped clear had become very fast. In just a blink of an eye, the second half of the book was only left with the clause, "All the following rules are ineffective." Following that, the clause disappeared as a new set of rules rapidly emerged without any gaps. The Trunsois brass book is the most precious item. No living being is permitted to touch it. Before this clause was completed, Ariana's figure had already appeared beside the rectangular table. Her finger touched the brass page. With a crack, the leader of the Church of Evernights Ascetic had her neck suddenly constricted as though an invisible rope had hoisted her up. As an angel, she had actually suffered bone fractures and had difficulties breathing. Death by hanging. However, with Ariana's finger sliding over with some difficulty, the first clause that appeared was erased before it was fully displayed. It entered a concealed state. As for all the rules set by 002, it had to be publicized or announced before it could truly be effective. With a whoosh, Ariana picked up the Trunsoist brass book and threw it to Klein, who was outside the window. In the previous hour, Klein had already anticipated all the possible developments and had a discussion with Ariana. He was in no way nervous or flustered. While 002 was still in midair, he dragged another himself wearing a human skin glove out of the void. Then, he grabbed the Trunsois brass book and used his historical projection to teleport away. After his figure disappeared from his spot, Ariana landed on the ground with a loud thud, a deep mark left on her neck. In just a few seconds, Klein, who was holding 002, appeared at the top of the main peak of the Hornassus mountain range. He used his spirit vision at the level of an angel and saw the collapsed, dilapidated, and fogged palace. Without any hesitation, Klein allowed his historical projection to take the Trunsoist brass book and blink to the main door of the palace before pushing the door open. What appeared before him was a hall with many corpses hanging from above. Every corpse was different. There were men and women, either dressed beautifully, simply, exquisitely, or casually. Behind each of these hangers was a transparent and slippery tentacle with complicated patterns. They came from the depths of the hall, from that ancient stone chair. On the huge stone chair, transparent and distorted maggots were formed into a ball. They grew wantonly and extended out strange tentacles. This was the half-fool of the Antigonus family, who had lost control and gone mad. Sensing the door open, and sensing Klein's historical projection approach, the cluster of maggots left the stone chair and fiercely flailed their slippery tentacles, causing them to surge towards the door as if they were being affected by an invisible suction force. Similarly, at the bottom of the stone chair, the tarot card with Roselle's image, which was written with a stellar radiance, flew towards the door. Just seeing this scene pushed Klein's historical projection towards experiencing a breakdown. Thankfully, he didn't possess any sentience and was remotely controlled by Klein. He didn't suffer the chaotic thoughts and the negative side effects of the mental mutation, nor did he stand motionless and helpless. Before the historical projection dissipated, it threw the Trunsoist brass book at the terrifying cluster of maggots. The transparent and slippery tentacles sensed danger and instinctively reacted by wrapping around sealed artifact 002. Under such interference and the invisible strong winds, the Fool card had reached the door one step ahead of the strange tentacles. Klein's historical projection had mostly collapsed. Seeing this, he mechanically extended his right hand, grabbed the card of blasphemy, and threw it behind him. In the next instant, the slippery tentacles that were reassembled had reached out to the door, but they were blocked by the fog, unable to exit. All it could do was wildly pound at the barrier. The open door slowly closed, blocking out this scene. Klein, who was hiding somewhere on the mountain peak, frowned slightly. He felt a sense of joy and relief, as well as a strong sense of doubt.
In other words, I used 002 to exchange for the Fool's card? The goddess doesn't need me to seek clues regarding the River of Eternal Darkness for the time being?
Klein silently muttered to himself. He walked out of the hidden area and arrived not far from the ancient palace. He bent down and picked up the card of blasphemy. On the surface of the card was Roselle Gustave, who was wearing colorful clothes and holding a stick and luggage. His eyes were filled with a longing for the future, and behind him was a puppy. On the upper left corner of the card, the resplendent stellar radiance outlined a few words. Sequence 0, the Fool. Inside the ancient palace, the Trunsoist brass book fell to the ground and opened up to the first page of the second half of the book. New rules began to form. The Trunsoist brass book is the most precious item. No living being is permitted to touch it. Those in violation are to be sentenced to death. One is not allowed to change the condition of the Trunsoist brass book in any way. Those in violation are to be sentenced to death. Just as the two rules just appeared, and before it could inform the owner here, a line of words suddenly appeared between the two halves of the book. All the following rules are ineffective. An hour later, the two rules were wiped out, and new rules were written. However, after just 2 lines, there was an additional clause in front of them. 002 seemed to have reached a blank slate that happened when the entire book was filled up. Again and again, the Trunsoist brass book fell into an endless cycle. Chapter 1290, Fulfilling Wishes. Putting away the Fool card, Klein took out Creeping Hunger from the Void, equipped it to his left hand, and activated Teleport. After returning to the miniaturized city library, he immediately said to the Servant of Concealment, Ariana,
It has been thrown into the abandoned palace on the main peak of the Hornassus mountain range.
That was an entrance to the foggy town. As for how to deal with 002 later on, it was the Church of Evernight's problem.
All right.
Ariana nodded and didn't say anything else. She entered a concealed state and vanished, as though she had been erased. She didn't thank him, nor mention any payment. It was just like how she had never made any requests when she helped Klein in the past.
Does Ma'am Ariana know that I've obtained the Fool card?
Klein looked around thoughtfully and slowly sighed in the darkness. Although the supernatural incident had been resolved in less than 2 hours, there were still quite a number of people who had lost their lives under the strict rules. The Beltane citizens had more or less committed certain mistakes, but the punishments they suffered were far more disproportionate to the crimes they had committed. The most innocent party in the matter were the tourists who came or passed by Beltane. They had to face a nightmare simply because they were foreigners. Klein had tried his best to do some things to protect many outsiders, including Roy and the others, but he was also limited in what he could do due to the restrictions he suffered. There weren't many loopholes that could be made use of, making it impossible to make it seem like none of that had ever happened.
What I need to do next is to mainly provide treatment to the survivors.
Klein retracted his gaze and planned on teleporting to Biles's house to deal with the remaining problems. At that moment, Renette Tieneker, who was holding 4 blonde, red-eyed heads and was wearing a dark and complicated long dress, walked out of the void. One of the heads bit onto a black goat's horn.
He escaped the spirit world.
The remaining 3 heads of Miss Messenger said.
As expected of a former chief shepherd.
Klein, who had long sensed it, sighed without any surprise. Then he pointed at the black goat's horn.
Did Larian leave that behind?
After Klein received the item, Renette Tieneker's head that hadn't spoken earlier said,
Yes.
After encountering the curse of deformity, he had still managed to barge out of the encirclement and escape from the spirit world. He is indeed powerful. Is this a Sequence 2 angel who's best at fighting head-on?
Klein flicked his wrist, causing the black goat horn in his palm to shatter into countless tiny specks of light as it dissipated, dispersing the remnant psyche. The limbs left behind by a Beyonder after them undergoing a transformation contain a portion of their Beyonder characteristics that couldn't return to the main body. When the points of light were reassembled from Sequence 9 to Sequence 7, as well as a Sequence 4 Beyonder characteristic, Klein chose the sequence 8 pugilist from it and returned the rest to Miss Messenger with a smile.
These are your spoils. I'll only collect the intelligence fee.
Renette Tinneker didn't stand on ceremony. She raised one of the blonde, red-eyed heads and had it open its mouth, absorbing the sequence 9, sequence 7, and sequence 4 warrior beyonder characteristics. After watching Miss Messenger leave Beltane, Klein teleported back to Biles's home and smiled at Roy and company.
The problem has been resolved. You are no longer foreigners who have to be treated with animosity.
The 4 Beyonders were just about to respond with heartfelt and relieved smiles when they saw the magical Mr. Magician invite a stranger from the air. It was an old man with a dark red bow tie. He wore a shirt, vest, formal suit, and blue-striped trousers. His hair remained thick despite it being all white. His aura was warm and elegant. This was the marionette, Haven Rambis, whom Klein had once possessed. He planned on using this manipulator to seal away their memories of 002. Not being corrupted by a Sapphira didn't mean that Biles wouldn't encounter terrifying matters when he recollected the matter. As there was only one relevant period of memory for Biles, and he didn't know the truth of the matter, what Klein needed to do was rather simple. Therefore, he didn't seek Miss Justice's help. He planned on using his marionette's historical void projection to complete it.
You didn't tell them about what happened in the city library, right?
Klein got Vin Rambis to walk to his side as he asked Biles, "I remember your advice." Biles hurriedly shook his head and said,
Very good. Next, I'll give you some psychological treatment. I'll help you forget all those matters. Otherwise, you'll be targeted by 002 and never be able to obtain peace until you die. Believe me, sealed artifacts at this level can definitely do something like that, even if it has been taken away.
Klein explained his goal, frankly. "All right?" Biles's lips quivered as he said. He chose to obey and believe. After inviting Roy, Pasha, and Phil out of this rental apartment, Klein controlled Huvin Rambis to do a series of mental control processes and successfully made Biles forget the brass book he had seen, as well as the contents on it. After doing this, Klein carefully took out the magic mirror and looked at it.
Rhodes, are there any other hidden dangers?
On the surface of the ancient silver mirror, the aqueous light flickered and reflected a line of silver words.
Great Master, there aren't any latent risks in Beltane. As for other places in Lowen and Fasak, as it involves 002 itself, I'm unable to see it clearly. Perhaps you can confirm it yourself?
All right.
Klein nodded slightly, took out a gold coin, and softly chanted the corresponding divination statement. With a ping, the gold coin flicked up and tumbled in the air. During this process, scenes naturally surfaced in Klein's mind. They were chimneys, streets, and cities. They were extremely vague and lacked specific directions. With a slight frown, he collected his thoughts and reached out to catch the gold coin. Chaki nuisterum uoa traka. Then, he got Pasha and the others to return to Biles's home. He smiled and said to Roy,
Didn't you wish to obtain the next potion? You can make a wish now.
"I can still make another wish?" Roy's eyes revealed surprise, and he asked nervously.
This is a gift.
Klein replied with a smile. Roy's heart stirred. Without asking any more questions, he seized this opportunity to fulfill his wish of obtaining the next potion. Klein then threw the Warrior Pathway's Sequence 8 Pugilist Beyonder characteristic to him.
This is essentially a potion, but for safety, I suggest you search for the corresponding formula and find the correct supplementary ingredients.
Your amazing feats are worthy of praise. Roy expressed his gratitude. His first potion had, in some sense, been a Warrior Beyonder characteristic that he devoured. As the apocalypse was approaching, along with his relatively low sequence and good luck, he didn't lose control on the spot. He didn't even have any serious psychological problems. After that, he gradually came into contact with other Beyonders and came into contact with true mysticism. Only then did he learn how dangerous his actions were and he didn't dare make a similar attempt again. Faced with Roy's praise, Klein looked around and smiled.
Next, follow me out of Beltane. This doesn't mean that there's still danger here, but I have to make use of this time to fulfill your wishes.
One wish involved Roy hoping that Klein could help them leave the Beltane, while the other wish involved Pasha's wish to have Klein protect them and allow them to leave Beltane City alive. Although these two matters were meaningless under the present situation, to Klein he had to fulfill the wish, even if there was no point in doing it.
I'm just a heartless wish-granting machine.
Klein lampooned himself as he smiled at Biles and company. Pasha and the others glanced at each other, not daring to raise any objections. Just like before, they held each other's hands. Then Klein brought them to the outskirts of Beltane with teleportation.
The magic show has come to an end. It's time to say goodbye.
Klein took off his hat and bowed. He tried his best to make himself a true wandering magician. This was a habit of his acting. "Can we know your name?" Upon seeing this, Pasha blurted out,
I have too many names. Different people have different names for me. You can call me the miracle magician, Merlin Hermes.
"Mr. Hermes, are you a believer of the Evernight goddess?" Roy asked after some hesitation. For a moment, Klein didn't know how to answer. He really wanted to say that he once was, but not anymore. After some consideration, he decided to act as an attendant of mysteries in advance. He immediately restrained his smile and solemnly said,
The one I serve is the Fool, the Lord of the Mysteries, the great ruler above the spirit world. If you wish to believe in this mighty existence, or wish to gain more of an understanding, you can go to the Sonia Sea's Rorstad archipelago. The Lord's missionary Danitz is currently preaching there. Furthermore, the City of Silver definitely has all the potion formulas from the Warrior Pathway under Sequence 2.
Klein silently added, but he didn't say it out loud. "It's my first time knowing of such a mighty existence in this world. Your miraculous nature has shown his brilliance." Roy nodded slightly and said he didn't directly respond to Mr. Merlin Hermes because he was still hesitant. Pasha, Biles, and Phil were the same. Without another word, Klein turned around and left the Four Beyonders, before making a detour to Beltane. He didn't forget his purpose in alighting at this tiny city. He planned on immediately finding a room to study the Fool card above the gray fog. In a city in mid-seashore, at a particular library, a young law researcher took out a book from the bookshelf and walked to a table by the window and sat down. As he carefully read through the book, he realized that there was a page of yellowish-brown paper in it. "What is this?" The young law researcher muttered to himself in confusion and reached out to pull out the paper. After confirming that it was written in ancient Faceac, the content was rather rare. In the Fourth Epoch, there was a book named the Trunsoist Brass Book.